Imagine walking into your kitchen tomorrow morning. You see that familiar ceramic mug, the one you use every day for coffee. But what if, suddenly, you saw it as an alien archaeologist might? This strange, cylindrical artifact, carefully crafted, with a curious handle jutting out from one side, clearly designed for some mysterious ritual involving hot liquids. In 1917, Russian literary theorist Viktor Shklovsky proposed a radical idea. Great art doesn't just show us things, it makes us see them anew. He argued that our daily routines, our habits, our comfortable assumptions about the world around us actually blind us to reality. We stop seeing what's in front of us. We stop feeling. We stop thinking. But what if we could break free from this automation of perception? What if writers could craft passages that force us to pause, to notice, to really see the world again as if for the first time? This is the power of defamiliarization, the art of transforming the mundane into the extraordinary, the familiar into the strange. Throughout this exploration, we'll uncover how master writers have used this technique to revolutionize how millions view everyday life. From Tolstoy describing a horse's perspective on human society, to Kafka transforming a simple morning into an existential crisis, we'll see how defamiliarization doesn't just change how we read, it changes how we see the world itself. And the most powerful example? Well, it's one that fundamentally altered how an entire generation viewed something they thought they understood completely. But before we get there, let's start with how this literary technique works and why it might be more relevant today than ever before. Picture yourself trying to explain a necktie to a highly intelligent horse. No, really. How would you describe this thin strip of fabric that humans wrap around their necks for purely aesthetic reasons? This is exactly the kind of delightfully awkward situation Jonathan Swift created in Gulliver's Travels, and it remains one of literature's most brilliant examples of defamiliarization in action. Swift's genius lay in his use of multiple perspectives to make the familiar appear utterly strange. Through Gulliver's adventures, we see human society from radically different vantage points, whether it's looking down at tiny Lilliputians or up at giant Brobdingnagians. But it's in the land of the Houyhnhnms, where intelligent horses rule over brutish humans, that Swift's defamiliarization reaches its satirical peak. When Gulliver attempts to explain European society to his horse hosts, suddenly our most basic customs and institutions appear absurd. Wars fought over different interpretations of religious texts become exercises in mass insanity. The complexities of law and politics transform into elaborate schemes for the powerful to exploit the weak. Even something as simple as wearing clothes, when explained to creatures who have no need for them, reveals the strange artificiality of human customs. Consider how Swift describes a typical English courthouse through Gulliver's explanation to the Houyhnhnms, a place where humans in large black cloaks and white animal hair on their heads speak in an incomprehensible language while deciding the fate of others. What makes Swift's approach so effective is that he doesn't just use size differences or talking horses as mere novelties. Each perspective shift serves to strip away our comfortable assumptions about human society. When we see ourselves through the eyes of the Lilliputians, our grand ambitions appear petty. Through the Brobdingnagians' view, our physical imperfections become impossible to ignore. And through the rational Houyhnhnms' perspective, the irrationality of human behavior becomes glaringly obvious. This layered use of defamiliarization does more than just create humor. It forces readers to confront uncomfortable truths about their own society. By making the familiar strange, Swift created a work that has remained relevant for centuries, continuing to help readers see their own world with fresh, more critical eyes. It's a masterclass in how changing perspective can reveal truth, showing that sometimes we need to step far outside our normal view to truly see ourselves clearly. What if I told you that the word freedom could be made to disappear, not by banning it, but by slowly changing what it means until it becomes unrecognizable? This is exactly what George Orwell explored in 1984 through his creation of Newspeak, perhaps the most systematic attempt to defamiliarize language itself in literary history. Newspeak isn't just a fictional language, it's a masterclass in how controlling language can control thought. Consider the word good. In standard English, we have countless ways to express degrees of goodness: excellent, wonderful, magnificent, superb. But in Newspeak, these are all reduced to mechanical variations: good, plus good, double plus good. By making these familiar concepts strange, Orwell forces us to confront how language shapes our ability to think. The genius of Orwell's approach lies in how he defamiliarizes not just individual words, but the very structure of language itself. Take the word thought crime, a concept that's both immediately understandable and deeply unsettling. By combining familiar words in unfamiliar ways, Orwell creates terms that feel simultaneously alien and eerily natural. This technique makes readers question not just the words on the page, but their own everyday language. When a character says double plus good instead of excellent, we're not just seeing a different word, we're witnessing the shrinking of human expression. The mechanical, repetitive nature of Newspeak terms makes emotional and intellectual nuance impossible. It's a chilling demonstration of how limiting language can limit thought. When we hear modern political euphemisms like enhanced interrogation instead of torture, or collateral damage instead of civilian casualties, we're experiencing real-world examples of how language can be manipulated to distance us from reality. Orwell's technique helps us recognize these patterns by making them strange enough to notice. Perhaps most disturbing is how prescient Orwell's insights were. Words like thought crime and doublethink have entered our everyday vocabulary because they describe phenomena we increasingly recognize in our own world. By defamiliarizing language itself, Orwell created a lens through which we can examine how our own words shape and sometimes distort our understanding of reality. This is why 1984 remains so powerful. It doesn't just tell us that language can be manipulated, it shows us how, making the familiar strange enough that we can never look at our own words quite the same way again. In an age of carefully crafted political messaging and corporate doublespeak, Orwell's linguistic defamiliarization might be more relevant than ever. Not just the mechanical ticking of a clock, but the way time flows through consciousness, rippling across an entire city, connecting thoughts, memories, and moments in ways that defy linear progression. This is exactly what Virginia Woolf achieved in Mrs. Dalloway, where she transformed the familiar experience of time passing into something wonderfully strange and profound. At the heart of this defamiliarization are the novel's iconic Big Ben scenes. As the great clock strikes throughout the day, Woolf doesn't just mark time, she makes us feel it in entirely new ways. When Big Ben strikes noon, we don't just get a simple, the clock struck 12. Instead, the sound becomes a physical force, rippling out across London interrupting thoughts, connecting strangers, and creating a shared moment of consciousness that feels simultaneously intimate and vast. Consider how Woolf describes one such moment. Clarissa Dalloway crosses Victoria Street, and Big Ben strikes. But instead of a simple chronological marker, the sound becomes something alien and profound, leaden circles dissolving in the air. Through this defamiliarization, the familiar experience of hearing a clock becomes strange and new. Time itself is transformed from a simple forward progression into something more complex and mysterious. What makes this technique so powerful is how Woolf uses it to challenge our entire understanding of how time works in human consciousness. Through her stream of consciousness style, we experience how a single moment can contain entire lifetimes of memory and thought. A woman buying flowers in the morning becomes a portal into the past, present, and future all at once. The striking of Big Ben doesn't just mark hours, it reveals how time flows differently in the mind than it does on the clock. This defamiliarization had a revolutionary impact on modernist literature. By making time itself feel strange, Woolf showed how the human mind actually experiences reality, not in neat chronological order, but in a complex web of interconnected moments. When Big Ben strikes, it doesn't just remind characters of the time, it creates a moment of shared consciousness across the city, connecting different narratives and perspectives in ways that feel both utterly strange and deeply true. The genius of Woolf's approach lies in how she takes something as fundamental as time, something we think we understand completely, and makes it feel new and mysterious again. Through her defamiliarization, we're forced to question our assumptions about how time works, how consciousness flows, and how moments connect to create meaning. Today, when we hear a clock strike or check the time on our phones, we might remember Woolf's leaden circles dissolving in the air. We might pause to consider how that moment connects to others, how time flows differently in our minds than on our devices. By making time strange, Woolf helped us see it more clearly than ever before. What's more disturbing? Waking up as a giant insect, or realizing that your biggest concern about this transformation is being late for work? This is the brilliant defamiliarization at the heart of Kafka's The Metamorphosis, where the most shocking thing isn't the impossible transformation, it's how mundanely everyone reacts to it. From its famous opening line, Kafka upends our expectations, not through dramatic horror, but through an almost bureaucratic acceptance of the absurd. Gregor Samsa awakens as a massive insect, and his first thought is about his job. His family worries not about his transformation itself, but about practical matters, like his ability to contribute to household expenses. Through this matter-of-fact treatment of the impossible, Kafka makes our normal human relationships feel stranger than any physical metamorphosis. What makes this defamiliarization so powerful is how it forces us to question what makes us human. Is it our physical form, our ability to work, our family relationships? By presenting Gregor's humanity as something that gradually erodes, not through his transformation into an insect, but through his family's changing treatment of him, Kafka makes us confront uncomfortable truths about how we define human worth. Consider how Gregor's sister initially cares for him, carefully selecting foods he might enjoy, only to later treat him as a burden to be removed. The defamiliarization here works in reverse. It's not the bizarre situation that becomes normal, but rather the normal family bonds that become bizarre and alien. Through this lens, our own familiar relationships suddenly seem strange and conditional. The impact of this technique extends far beyond the story itself. Kafka's approach to defamiliarization, treating the impossible as mundane while making the mundane seem impossible, has influenced countless writers and artists. When modern authors write about identity crises or family dynamics, they often draw from Kafka's playbook of making the familiar strange through matter-of-fact acceptance of the absurd. Perhaps most remarkably, Kafka's defamiliarization technique has become so influential that we now have the term Kafkaesque to describe situations where normal life takes on a nightmarish, yet bureaucratically ordinary quality. In our modern world of digital identities and changing social norms, his insights about how easily humanity can be lost or questioned feel more relevant than ever. By making human identity itself strange, Kafka created more than just a story about a man turning into an insect. He created a lens through which we can examine our own humanity, our relationships, and the often arbitrary ways we assign or withdraw human worth. In doing so, he showed how defamiliarization can reveal truths too uncomfortable to face directly, truths that become visible only when made strange enough to see clearly. Imagine reading a single chapter of a novel where the English language itself evolves before your eyes. From Latin prose to medieval romance to Victorian flourish to modern slang. This is exactly what James Joyce achieved in the Oxen of the Sun chapter of Ulysses, creating perhaps the most ambitious experiment in linguistic defamiliarization ever attempted. In this remarkable chapter, Joyce doesn't just tell a story, he takes readers on a journey through the entire history of English prose. The chapter begins with Latin incantations, transitions through Chaucer-like medieval English, moves through Shakespeare's era, passes through the flowery Victorian period, and finally explodes into modern Dublin slang. Consider how Joyce presents a simple scene of medical students discussing in a hospital. As the chapter progresses, this ordinary conversation transforms through at least 11 distinct historical styles. A casual remark about drinking might appear in Cardinal Newman's religious prose style, while a joke about pregnancy gets filtered through Walter Pater's aestheticism. Through this constant shifting, Joyce forces readers to confront how the same reality can feel radically different when viewed through different linguistic lenses. What makes this defamiliarization so powerful is how it reveals the artificial nature of all writing styles. By rapidly cycling through different periods of English prose, Joyce shows us that every way we write, even our most natural modern style, is just as constructed and strange as medieval English seems to us now. It's a revelation that makes us question our own relationship with language itself. The impact of this technique extends far beyond literary experimentation. By making English itself feel alien, Joyce forces us to confront how language shapes our perception of reality. When the same scene can feel completely different depending on how it's written, we're forced to question how much our understanding of the world is filtered through linguistic conventions we take for granted. This ambitious defamiliarization has influenced generations of experimental writers. When modern authors play with form, voice, or style, they're following the path Joyce blazed in Oxen of the Sun. His demonstration that language itself can be made strange opened new possibilities for how literature could challenge our perceptions. Perhaps most remarkably, Joyce's linguistic defamiliarization helps us understand our own relationship with language evolution. In an age of rapidly changing communication styles, from text messages to social media posts to AI-generated content, His insights about how language shapes reality feel more relevant than ever. By making English strange, Joyce helped us see more clearly how our words don't just describe the world, they actively shape how we perceive it. How do you make readers feel the weight of a historical trauma they've never experienced? How do you make the distant past feel as immediate as a paper cut? In Beloved, Toni Morrison answered these questions by defamiliarizing not just memory itself, but our entire relationship with historical trauma. Morrison's genius lies in how she transforms the familiar ghost story into something far more profound. Beloved isn't just a supernatural presence haunting 124 Bluestone Road. She's the physical manifestation of unprocessed historical trauma, forcing both characters and readers to confront what they'd rather forget. Through this defamiliarization, the abstract concept of slavery's generational impact becomes viscerally real. Consider how Morrison structures her narrative. She doesn't just tell the story chronologically. She fragments it, interrupts it, forces readers to piece it together like survivors processing trauma. A simple scene of a mother looking at her daughter might suddenly fracture into memories of impossible choices made decades ago. Through unpunctuated prose and stream of consciousness passages, Morrison makes the familiar act of remembering feel strange and new. Look at how she describes Seth's memories. They don't simply come back, they rememory, a term Morrison coined to defamiliarize the very concept of remembering. These aren't just passive recollections, they're active forces that exist in the physical world, waiting to be stumbled upon. Through this technique, Morrison transforms abstract historical trauma into something tangible, something that occupies physical space and demands confrontation. What makes this defamiliarization so powerful is how it forces readers to experience the disorienting nature of trauma themselves. Through linguistic disruptions, temporal shifts, and narrative interruptions, we don't just read about the characters' struggle to process their experiences. We struggle alongside them. The familiar comfort of linear narrative is denied to us, just as the comfort of straightforward memory is denied to the characters. The impact of this approach on historical fiction and trauma literature cannot be overstated. By defamiliarizing memory itself, Morrison created a new way to write about historical trauma that doesn't just inform readers, but transforms their understanding through experience. When modern authors write about collective trauma or intergenerational pain, they often draw from Morrison's techniques of making memory itself feel strange and immediate. Perhaps most remarkably, Morrison's defamiliarization of memory helps us understand our own relationship with historical trauma. In an age where we're increasingly confronting the legacies of historical injustices, her insights about how the past lives in the present feel more relevant than ever. By making memory strange, Morrison showed us how history isn't just something that happened long ago. It's something that continues to happen, demanding acknowledgement and understanding in the present moment. This is what Leo Tolstoy achieved in Strider, creating perhaps the most powerful example of defamiliarization in literary history. Consider how Tolstoy describes human behavior through his equine narrator. All this was so unjust, so cruel, that I was glad when they took me away from Krenovo and parted me forever from all that had been familiar and dear to me. Through the horse's perspective, our most basic assumptions about property, beauty, and social hierarchy become strange and questionable. A horse describing the cruelty of being separated from its home forces us to confront how we normalize similar injustices among humans. But Tolstoy's mastery of defamiliarization reaches its peak in War and Peace, particularly in the famous opera scene. Here, he describes a familiar cultural experience, attending the opera, as if seen by an alien anthropologist. Instead of accepting the conventions of opera as normal, Tolstoy forces us to see how strange it really is. Elaborately dressed people sitting in the dark, watching other people pretend to die while singing, following artificial rules about when to clap and when to remain silent. What makes Tolstoy's defamiliarization so powerful is how he uses it not just to create interesting perspectives, but to fundamentally change how readers perceive reality. Through Strider's eyes, we don't just see horses differently, we see human society differently. Through the opera scene's defamiliarization, we don't just see theater differently, we see all social conventions differently. The impact of this technique was revolutionary. By making the familiar strange, Tolstoy didn't just tell stories, he gave readers new tools for perceiving their own world. His approach influenced generations of writers, from Virginia Woolf to George Orwell, who understood that making readers see familiar things as strange was the key to changing how they think about reality itself. This is why Tolstoy's defamiliarization techniques remain so relevant today. When modern authors write about social inequality, cultural conventions, or human nature, they often draw from Tolstoy's playbook of making the familiar feel strange enough to be seen clearly for the first time. Perhaps most remarkably, Tolstoy's techniques work on multiple levels simultaneously. Through Strider's perspective, we see both the specific injustices of horse trading and the universal nature of exploitation. Through the opera scene, we see both the artificiality of theater and the constructed nature of all social conventions. In the end, what makes Tolstoy's defamiliarization the most powerful example of this technique is how it transforms not just how we read, but how we see. After encountering his work, readers can never look at their own social conventions, assumptions, and behaviors quite the same way again. Next time you perform your morning routine, try seeing it through Kafka's eyes, that strange ritual where humans voluntarily emerge from unconsciousness, only to immediately alter their appearance through elaborate cleansing ceremonies and the application of artificial coverings. Or perhaps view your social media feed through Tolstoy's horse, watching humans obsessively groom their digital representations while seeking approval from unseen masses. The power of defamiliarization lies not just in literature, but in its ability to change how we see our own world. As we've explored these masterful examples, from Swift's size-shifting perspectives to Morrison's ghost of memory, we've seen how making the familiar strange can reveal deeper truths about human nature and society. How would you describe your morning routine to make it seem strange and new? What familiar patterns would you break down and reconstruct to reveal their hidden absurdity or beauty? Which of the defamiliarization techniques we've examined do you think would be most effective for addressing current social issues? Could Orwell's language manipulation help us understand modern propaganda? Or might Joyce's style shifting illuminate how different media shape our perception of reality? How do you see defamiliarization techniques from literature influencing other art forms like film and television? Where do you notice familiar things being made strange to reveal new insights? Finally, what everyday experience would you choose to defamiliarize? And which author's approach would you use as a model? Would you view social media through Tolstoy's outsider perspective? Or perhaps describe modern technology with Swift's satirical eye? Remember, the goal of defamiliarization isn't just to make things strange, it's to make them strange enough to see clearly again. In a world where habit and routine often blind us to reality, perhaps making the familiar strange is exactly what we need to truly see.